Shabbat Shalom again. My Hanukkah. What is Hanukkah? This is the curious question asked by the rabbis in the Talmud, seemingly out of nowhere, in the section about Shabbat, in the middle of a short discussion about lighting Hanukkah candles. My Hanukkah, like ma Hanukkah in today's Hebrew. What is this thing called Hanukkah? What a strange question for the rabbis to ask, because it presumes or pretends that there is a lack of knowledge or awareness about Hanukkah among the Jews of the time, or among the rabbis, when we know historically that the community had been celebrating, commemorating the Maccabean victory in their time. And given the conversation about Hillel and Shammai and how to light the menorah, it's clear that there already were some practices being put in place, even if there was a debate as to how to do those things. The rabbis would certainly never ask, my Shabbat, what is Shabbat? My Yom HaKippurim, what is Yom Kippur? This feigned ignorance, it turns out, was a helpful tool for the rabbis to reframe Hanukkah. Hanukkah is coming in a few days, thus I took the liberty to talk about it today. By asking my Hanukkah, the rabbis gave themselves an opportunity to share a completely different story about the ikar, the essence of Hanukkah. And they tell a story that literally never existed before, and one that has nothing to do with what actually happened and was recorded in the historical telling of the rededication of the temple in the Maccabean time period. The story of the single cruse of oil that lasted 8 days, the story that most of us know as core to the Hanukkah narrative, is brought as a new idea, completely with no source sheet, with no proof text, just a new concept. It says in the Talmud, the rabbis taught on the 25th of Kislev begins the days of Hanukkah, on which lamentation for the dead and fasting are forbidden. For when the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled the oils on it, and when the Hasmonean dynasty prevailed over them and defeated them, they searched and found only one cruse of oil, one bottle of oil, sealed by the high priest. It contained only enough for 1 day's lighting. Yet a miracle was brought about for it, and it lasted for 8 days. The following year, there was established a festival with Hallel, praise, and thanksgiving. In perhaps one of the most successful PR campaigns of the rabbinic time period, they managed, at least for centuries, to make the story, at least primarily, about miracles and light. As has been established by many scholars, the rabbis likely made this bold choice because they were profoundly uncomfortable with the history and story of the Maccabees and the Hasmonean dynasty. They were uncomfortable for many reasons, because the story encouraged revolt in a time where the rabbis had failed to revolt against Rome, and they did not want to inspire more wishful thinking. They were uncomfortable because of the terrible irony that once these leaders came to power, these great religious freedom fighters, quote unquote, became Hellenizers in a generation or two, became those who actually insisted on assimilation. And what I want to talk about today, the rabbis were uncomfortable, perhaps disturbed, with the religious zealotry of the Maccabees, as is documented in the books of the Maccabees. And certainly this is something as progressive Jews, I think we should all be wary of when telling the story of the great Judah Maccabee and his family. In the book of the Maccabees, it is clear that the rebels and freedom fighters also targeted members of their own Jewish community for acts of zealotry. In one story, Mattathias murders a fellow Jew in Modi'in who approaches a pagan altar to sacrifice at the request of a Greek official. Mattathias kills him and the government official, tearing down the altar and proclaiming, as quoted in the book of Maccabees, "Let everyone who is zealous for the law and stands by the covenant follow me." And in that same text, Mattathias is praised as a zealot like the biblical character Pinchas, who takes the law into his own hands and kills a couple engaging in sexual idolatry, which is in the book of Numbers. Or Deuteronomy. Numbers, I think. Numbers. I got it. The rabbis in many places also express their discomfort with the zealotry of Pinchas, and we can understand the connection. The kind of lawlessness, violence, and ideological insistence on truth with a capital T stands in stark contrast with the rabbis, who were observant, of course, but people who believed in compromise when living among others, people who taught that study and action and chesed, compassion, were our primary duties, and taught elu ve'elu, divarim Elohim chayim, these and these are the words of the living God, that one can be religious and committed without being a zealot, without resorting to extremes that cause harm and lead to chaos and violence. That the fact that the rabbis wanted to diminish this story, the truth of what exists within our own people, on the edges of the violent extremist Maccabees, in lifting up a totally different story of miracles and light, I think is instructive for us. Now, to state the obvious, we are living in a moment in which the dangers of religious extremism are never more apparent and never perhaps more close to home. There are religious zealots and extremists who killed members of our extended Jewish family and who do not want the good of their own people and put them in harm's way. But today, I want to lift up the fact that the rabbis also recognize extremism within their own people, their own community. And they saw the dangers of these movements and how they could influence the next generation and found ways to counter their narratives. And I think it's time for us to be honest about the dangers of religious extremism that are very much alive today in Israel, and in particular right now in the West Bank. For as soon as the attention of the world, the primary attention of the army, went to Gaza, and I'm not talking about that today, just to be clear, only in so much that it's a broader part of the broader narrative. I'm not arguing that religious fundamentalism is the main core issue there. I'm arguing it right now on the ground in the West Bank. Religious extremists who had already been increasing their violent tactics toward Palestinians in the West Bank seized an opportunity. According to the Times of Israel, which I want to state is a very centrist newspaper, there have been more than 185 settler attacks against Palestinians in over 84 towns and villages in the West Bank since October 7th. I'm not talking about police raids for people suspected of terrorism. That's actually another story, another topic for another time. Simply individuals who, based on their Jewish religious extremist views, believe the entire land belongs to the Jewish people given to us by God, and that we need to do whatever we can to take over all of it. And their zealous tactics, like violently berating individuals, threatening them at gunpoint, entering in their homes with guns and words of intimidation, are actually working, because some 970 Palestinians have been displaced out of the West Bank or out of their homes since October 7th. Extremists do not only act on their own. They do so with impunity from a system that looks the other way, or slaps, a proverbial slap on the wrist, or complicit acceptance. And since October 7th, the government, I'm not saying it's for this reason, but the government has loosened gun ownership laws and encouraged people to arm themselves, I think in the sense of protecting yourself in case there was another attack. But that also means that more arms can go to people who have extremist positions, just like if we loosened the gun laws in America. And I want to say that speaking about this today, I do with a great deal of trepidation. The atrocities committed on October 7th have profoundly impacted me. They've changed me. And I have never felt such a deep connection or a need for Israel. And I am trying myself to figure out how I can get there myself in the next few months, because I feel this deep need to witness and support. And further, in a time when it seems like everyone is attacking Israel, not only since the bomb started or since the response started, but even on October 7th itself, it may seem like a time where we have to speak 100% in favor of Israel and full support, and I get that completely. And we should be supporting Israel in our own ways. But at the same time, I believe standing with Israel also means standing with the principles that it had in its original Declaration of Independence. Its intention to be a refuge for Jews and also a home to all. And just as we want others to condemn and ourselves to condemn those who say Palestine from the river to the sea, knowing that that means the potential harm or eradication of the world, half the world's Jewish population, so too we must fiercely call out among our people who say Israel from the river to the sea, knowing that this also erases and gives potential displacement for Palestinians living in the West Bank and in other places, East Jerusalem and other places. And if our ancient rabbis could at the very least be ambivalent towards violent extremist voices within the Jewish community, so should we, or so maybe more than ambivalent. And perhaps all the more emphatically because we see the repercussions and corruption of the rabbinic vision of a strong Jewish people in real time. Perhaps if we diminish the power of those voices, if they can diminish the power of those voices of extremism in their time or in their history, so can we. And let us remember, the rabbis were master storytellers. They were master storytellers. They did not just diminish the Maccabees, leaving them just in a few prayers and moving them from the center to the margins of the narrative. They gave us a new story. A story that we could live by, a story that could sustain us, and that has sustained us for thousands of years. The story of one small bit of oil that lasted for 8 days. The hope that in the darkest of times, there can be light, and there can be miracles, and there can be hope. And so in that spirit of the rabbis, I want to invite us to think about the stories that we want to lift up, the stories that give us hope, and the stories that make us champions of light in the darkness. Stories like one from my friend, Rabbi Michael Cohen, who shared this week about the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies at Kibbutz Ketorah, where he teaches. The Arava Institute is an incredible organization, if you don't know it. Palestinian, Jordanian, Israeli, and other international students and future leaders gather to learn and to meet the Middle East's environmental challenges with innovative peace-building and sustainable solutions for the future. They have over 1,800 diverse alumni. Rabbi Cohen shared that at the beginning of the Israel-Gaza war, 3 Arava Institute students, alumni, created a WhatsApp group for Israelis and Palestinians to support each other and share their pain with shared human experience. And that group has over 1,000 members. Stories like one from my colleague, Rabbi Chaviva Ner David, an Israeli Reconstructionist rabbi who organizes multiple peace-building fronts. She wrote recently about an emergency Arab-Jewish solidarity conference organized by Omdim B'Yachad, Standing Together in Tamara, a large Arab village with over 200 people, Israelis and Palestinians. And she said the atmosphere at the conference was hopeful, not because the reality was hopeful, but because we, Jewish Arab solidarity groups like Omdim B'Yachad, are the hope. Now, many of you say these are very small things. We are at war. We are experiencing so much anti-Semitism. And again, we absolutely need to find our way through that. We need the hostages to come home. We need the captives to come home. We need to figure out a way forward. We need to make sure that Israel is safe. We have no way knowing how this is going to end, if this is going to end. And to this cynicism in our hearts, I want to say yes. And the rabbis in their time were recovering from a terrible defeat, navigating a new world without a centralized home, seeking to integrate and create unity at a time when people were spread everywhere and there were no cell phones, where they were navigating building community across a globe. And they were probably just one voice of many at the time. And they told us, choose hope, choose light, tell the story of that cruise of oil so that we can become champions of light. I pray the safety of Israel. I pray for an end of all forms of religious extremism. I pray for a better future for all human beings on this world. And let us say, Amen.